Moonlight and Moonshine ***** Moonlight and Moonshine by Thomson Burtis, author of Texas Steer's Release, etc. George Arlington Hemingway, of the Air Service, didn't care what those Kentucky mountaineers did so long as they didn't do it to him. But when a bullet in the engine of his soaring plane made him try to figure out how to land on treetops and live, he concluded that it was time to start something. Lieutenant George Arlington Hemingway, of the Hemingways of Boston, was wrestling with a problem. Having applied soothing lotions to his freshly shaved and smarting face, and put the last touches to the part in his black hair, he continued to stare into the small mirror and wonder whether he ought to do it or not. He leaned over until his deeply tanned face was within an inch of the glass and inspected in detail the small, close-cropped black mustache which adorned his upper lip. It was a fairly luxuriant mustache, as those hirsute adornments go, but it did not quite satisfy his critical eye. Was it worthwhile to shave it off in the hope that two hairs would sprout where but one had grown before? Let it go as it was, he decided. Having decided this burning question, Hemingway proceeded leisurely to don his tan serge shirt. He had no further interest in his face, although that, like its principal ornament, was a good enough specimen of its kind. A bit round, perhaps, and certainly very brown, but lighted amazingly by a pair of sparkling brown eyes and a wide, good-humored mouth which was usually curved in either a smile or a grin. If not, it conveyed the impression that it would stretch into one or the other at the slightest provocation. It was the face of a contented and cheery person, both of which George Arlington Hemingway was. Being a first lieutenant in the Air Service satisfied him completely, and he had little more to ask from fate. The future was pleasant to his mind's eye. He wasted no thought whatever on his prospects. He could not have told you where he stood on the promotion list, because he did not care particularly whether he ever became a captain or not. Life, as it was and as he lived it, was a good invention of the Lord's to his mind. The 2 rooms he occupied, with walls of beaverboard and a leak in the ceiling, were comfortable enough to live in and far more appealing than the shadowed confines of the Hemingway residence on Beacon Hill, and, although his father's bank was a fine big bank and his father's son could lead an enviable commercial existence therein, the cockpit of a de Havilland airplane was infinitely more desirable. This despite the fact that George Arlington Hemingway had led a wild, not to say sensational existence during his 5 years of flying. From Long Island to the Philippines, and from Selfridge Field on the Canadian border to France Field in Panama, he was known as the unluckiest flyer still above the ground instead of under it. He could handle a ship along with the best, that was conceded. However, there appeared to be a conspiracy of motors and the elements against him. He had had more forced landings by half than any other flyer on the list. And almost invariably they occurred over such choice bits of country as the Everglades, the wilder sections of the Mexican border, Chesapeake Bay, the Rockies, and similar traps for unwary airplanes. He had been rescued 30 miles out at sea during the bombing maneuvers at Langham Field, Virginia, he had laid amid the wreckage of his ship in the Big Bend for 2 days, without food or water, and been found by a miracle. He had landed in a canyon in Arizona and wandered for a week in the mountains. He had been shot down 3 times in France, and a list of the injuries he had encountered would include mention of a considerable percentage of the bones of the human body. Always, however, George Arlington Hemingwood bobbed up serenely, cursing his luck with fluency and grinning. His whole-souled enjoyment of life extended to flying, and was not dampened by the crack-ups thereof. Having found his big Stetson, he adjusted it on his head at the precise angle which appealed to his liking in these matters. Even with the aid of that impressive $20 chapio, he did not look like a man whose hand had frequently been outstretched to greet Saint Peter, who was on speaking terms, as it were, with the life hereafter. He was slightly under medium height, and looked a bit shorter than his 5 feet 7.5 because of a pair of powerful shoulders. He was impeccable arrayed, as always. He was careful about those things. It was characteristic that the insignia of rank and branch of service on his collar were placed with exactitude. He strolled out through his sitting room, the shabbily comfortable and muchly cluttered domicile of a carefree bachelor, and down the long hall, emerging into the warm sunlight of a spring afternoon in Kentucky. Springtime in Kentucky is a savory season, and 4 of the flyers of Goddard Field were taking advantage of it by laying at full length on the grass in front of the barracks. Directly across the road 4 corrugated iron hangars squatted in a row, paralleling the line of buildings of which the officers' quarters was one. On the other side of the hangars was Goddard Field, a small, rough aerodrome which sloped down to the great artillery camp which spread out for 2 square miles at its foot. Like the buildings of the flying detachment, Camp Henry's barracks and stables had never been painted, and the big cantonment looked aged and infirm, which it was. "What is the subject of discussion?" enquired Hemingwood as he ignited a cheroot. "Snapper is trying to justify the fact that he possesses a new fiancée by spacious arguments in favor of marriage," returned Big Blonde Morrison. "Of course, looking at it impartially and without prejudice, marriage is a sucker game from a man's viewpoint," stated Hemingwood weightily. "What do you mean?" enquired Snapper McNeil belligerently. The wiry, red-headed little flyer was a heaven-sent victim for serious persiflage, and was very much in love. Aside from the temporary state of insanity known as love, the state has no arguments in its favor from a man's viewpoint, pursued Hemingwood. "Look at the expense, for one thing. However, cheer up, Snapper, even marriage has its points. Don't think I consider it an unmitigated evil." "You can't, beg pardon, sir," said a voice at Hemingwood's elbow. "Major Williamson's compliments, and will the lieutenant report to headquarters immediately?" Tall, gaunt Private Rose, perpetual orderly of the officers' barracks, stood at rigid attention and spewed these words forth as though in mortal fear of forgetting one if he stopped. "Be right over," Rose nodded Hemingwood. So saying, he turned on his heel and left them spellbound. He strolled toward headquarters, wondering what was up. Some new job, probably. As photographic officer, his duties were by no means onerous, and consequently he had a great fear that lightning would strike, at any moment, in the form of an order assigning him to some prosaic task in addition to his other duties. However, his fears were groundless. He found Major Williamson enthroned behind his desk, arguing acrimoniously with Goebel, the sandy-haired and excitable adjutant. The CO fought frequently with Goebel for the purpose of prodding the adjutant until he started pounding the desk, which he frequently did. Washington has at last discovered that there's a photographic section hidden away here, the major told him. You're due for a sojourn in the back hills of Kentucky, where moonshine grows on bushes and rifle bullets flow like water. The orders were brief and to the point. Hemmingwood was to make a mosaic of the Salters River between the villages of Laporte and Herkimer. That would be about 30 miles, Hemmingwood reflected. The mosaic was to include all the territory for 5 miles on each side of the river. 300 square miles, which was several days' work. It was for the use of the Geological Survey, according to the order, and was to be accomplished without delay. Hemmingwood was delighted. He was whistling cheerfully as he made off to interview a person and get things in readiness for a week's stay in the wilderness. He found Sergeant Apperson, his chief non-com, in the photo hut. Apperson was a gray-haired veteran who was as reliable as a tax collector and knew more about cameras than the inventors thereof. Anything from a pocket machine to a motion picture outfit was in his professional bailiwick. He was a wiry, weather-beaten little Scotchman who retained a trace of the brogue of his youth. "We'll have our bay suit yonder, no doot?" he queried. "We'll be ready in the morning, sir." The invaluable Apperson was likewise an excellent mechanic in addition to his other praiseworthy talents, so Hemmingwood told him to have the ship warmed and ready by 6 in the morning. Whereupon he dismissed everything from his mind. Apperson never failed. Chapter 2. At precisely 6:45 next morning Hemmingwood was commencing to look for the Salters River, which was his principal landmark to aid in finding East Point. For a half-hour he had been flying over the mountains. As far as the eye could see, even from the airy perch of 3,000 feet, low-rolling, heavily wooded hills rolled away to the skyline. It was not difficult to believe the bloody history of those thousands of acres of unkempt wilderness as one looked down on the grim fastnesses which hid in their depths a strange breed who lived and fought and died in a shadowed, primitive world of their own. George himself had had a sample of the suspicious mountain people when he had been forced to land in the hills a few months before. Another flyer would have been taught with the strain of flying continuously over a wilderness which presented no possible landing field. The failure of 2 or 3 cylinders of the 12-cylinder, 450 horsepower Liberty meant crashing into the trees at 70 miles an hour. But no worry bothered George Arlington Hemmingwood. His untroubled eyes scanned the glistening instruments, and he enjoyed the ride. He couldn't be worried until disaster actually overtook him. The specially built ship, carrying 135 gallons of gas, roared along over the mountains at 100 miles an hour. To offset the extra weight of gas, oil, and electric cameras, it was streamlined to the last possible degree, and it was a tribute to a person's loving care down to the last turnbuckle glistening in the morning sun. Finally the tiny stream came in sight, and he swung southward. It twined along between the mountains, sometimes in deep gorges and sometimes level with tiny fields on its banks. Herkimer came in sight, and he instantly vetoed the one field near it. It was plowed land and the furrows were high and soft. He sped along over the village, and deeper up into the mountains. Herkimer was lost to sight almost immediately. There was a 3-minute interval when he only picked up one cabin. Then East Point came in sight, and proved to be a pleasant surprise. It was larger than Herkimer, despite having no railroad, and the wide main street was shaded with towering trees. It was set at the base of a mountain, and for a half-mile westward small cleared fields occupied the tiny valley floor. There were small plowed fields on the mountainsides, too, gleaming white against the green of the woods. Hemmingwood, scrutinizing the ground closely, finally found a field, although it was not as near town as he would have liked. It was a long, narrow grass clearing just below the crest of the mountain behind East Point, on the slope opposite the town. 4 miles east of the clearing there was a small settlement which was not on his map. He throttled the motor to 1,000 revolutions a minute and dropped down for a look. He could see the residents of East Point popping forth from their houses for a look at the visitor from the sky. There would be some excitement down there, he soliloquized. He noticed a solitary horseman toiling up the road from East Point to that settlement, whatever its name was. The road led past his prospective landing place, which would make transportation of gas and oil a simple matter. The field lay north and south, with an eastern slope. It was surrounded by towering trees on 3 sides, but to the north, where the road skirted it, there was a good approach. He swooped down within 10 feet of the ground and flashed across it for a detailed inspection. It rolled slightly and the grass was 4 or 5 inches long. A few rocks protruded from the vegetation, but the middle of the clearing seemed to be without obstacles. He decided immediately to try it. As he zoomed upward and turned northward to land over the road, he looked around at the imperturbable person. He pointed down at the field, and a person removed his pipe and nodded. Not in approval, merely understanding. A person considered everything in the photo section as his business, except flying. This he left entirely to Hemmingwood. If his chief had indicated the Ohio River as a landing place, a person would have nodded. Hemmingwood came in low over the thin fringe of trees, cutting the motor gradually. The heavy ship had almost lost speed when it was over the road, and was mushing downward. Hemmingwood stabbed the throttle ahead for a second as the de Havilland settled over the fence. The spurt of power held the nose up a second more, and the stick was back in his lap when the ship hit on 3 points in a hard stall landing. It rolled with slackening speed up a small hump in the field, picked up again as it rolled down the other side, and stopped at the top of the second fold, a safe 100 yards from the southern boundary. It was flying as perfect as it was unconsciously skillful. Hemmingwood gave it the gun and taxied to the fence. He turned off the gasoline feed, ran the motor out, and clicked off the switches. "I'll take a constitutional down to the city, a person, and see where we sleep and eat, if any. Likewise where we get gas and oil, and how. I guess you'd better stay here. There'll be the usual mob of people show up, I suppose." "Quite so," nodded a person, raising his yellow-tinted goggles deliberately. "You'll have transportation to get the hags into town, no doubt." "Aha! I'll be back in a couple of hours, by the time the sun gets right for pictures, anyhow." He climbed out, lit a cigarette, and surveyed the cloudless sky with satisfaction. The mosaic would be taken from 11,000 feet, and even a few cumulus clouds would mean great gaps in the pictures. It looked like a good working day. A person was busy in the back cockpit, unwiring divers' articles he had packed away there. He could fit anything up to an automobile into the cockpit of a ship. Article after article materialized from the mystic depths, until it was a problem where the sergeant himself had ridden. Hemmingwood took off his flying suit and made off without further ado. It was about 3 miles over the mountain to East Point, he estimated, and it would be a phenomenon if he did not meet a procession of cars, one of which would be delighted to turn around and give him a lift. He had proceeded up the dusty road for a half-mile, and had just reached the crest of the hill when a horseman hove in sight. The one he had seen from the air, probably. He did not seem in a hurry, for the horse was ambling along at pretty much his own gait. Suddenly Hemmingwood's dark eyes lighted with interest and he became conscious that his face was undoubtedly spotted with oil. That was a woman on that horse, riding astride. Furthermore, she was a young woman. A big, white Panama hat, shaped like a man's, shaded her face, and her costume consisted of khaki riding trousers, leather boots, and a white blouse. In a few seconds he was able to state with conviction that not only was the rider a young woman, but that she was also a most remarkably attractive specimen of her sex. And George Arlington Hemmingwood was not a man who allowed opportunity to knock at his door without an answer. He stopped a few feet in front of the horse and smiled up at the girl. "I beg your pardon, but could you tell me the name of the town that seems to be at the end of this road?" Her piquant face, framed by the Panama and bobbed hair, dimpled slightly as she pulled up her horse. "Which end of the road?" she enquired. "The one I'm headed for," it seemed to be the biggest. "East Point," she informed him. "Did you have a forced landing?" "You talk like a flyer," grinned Hemmingwood. "No, I came down on purpose. I thought I was near East Point, but it's hard to tell from the air. Particularly in such thickly settled country," he added. She chuckled, a peculiarly infectious performance as she accomplished it. She was a tiny little thing, Hemingwood thought, and her small, oval face with its saucily tilted nose and rather wide mouth possessed a charm which far transcended the mere beauty of more regular features. She did not look as if a resident of the mountains. "You know, pretty lady, I've read a few flying stories in some of our magazines, and in every one some beautiful girl always materializes as soon as an airplane lands," he remarked. "They just pop out of bushes in the wilderness or from behind sand hummocks in the desert. But in 5 years of flying it's the first time I've seen it happen." "Well, this is the first time you've ever landed anywhere near me," she returned, mirth in her gray eyes. "My mistake," laughed Hemingwood. "I wonder if you could give me some information. I expect to be in your village, or above it, for a few days, taking pictures of this flock of mountains. If they rolled Kentucky out flat it would be bigger than Texas." She laughed aloud this time. Her face had an out-of-doors look about it, just a hint of golden tan and red cheeks with the color underneath the skin instead of on top of it. "The main things I want to know are as follows. Where can my trusty sergeant and myself procure beds and boards for ourselves? And is there any garage in town where we can buy gasoline and oil?" "That last remark is an insult," she said severely. "I ought to ride off and leave you standing here after that insinuation against East Point. However, you're a stranger. My uncle has practically the only store in East Point. He sells gasoline and oil. He must be a good businessman, judging by his choice of salesman," commented Hemingwood. "That's the secret of his success," she confided smilingly. "About the boarding house, I don't know. We have no regular hotel or even boarding house, but I guess my uncle could tell you where to go." "And your uncle's name is Mumford. You can't miss the store. There's a big sign on it." "Do you think you could stand it if I introduced myself?" enquired Hemingwood. "I might." Hemingwood, George Hemingwood, hailing at present from Camp Henry. "How do you do, Lieutenant Hemingwood?" she smiled. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? Be a nice day if the weather doesn't change," Miss Blank agreed the flyer. "I'll let you substitute Morgan in the blank. Are we ordinary people on the ground to be allowed to look at your airplane? I'll show you the sights myself." She glanced down at the tiny gold watch on her wrist. 10 minutes of 9. I've got to hurry. I'm a hard-working schoolmarm, you see. But I do want to see your plane, Lieutenant. What time do you get through for the day? 4 o'clock. Are you riding to school? Come back this way. Yes. I'll be waiting at the ship for you. I want to be present when you see it, because it all sounds so much more impressive as I explain things. I will be supposed to worship in silent awe, perhaps. You be interested, and I'll do the worshipping," grinned Hemingwood. "You don't appear to be of the reverent sort. However, I'll look forward to it. Goodbye until this afternoon." She threw him a smile and urged her fat white horse into a lumbering gallop. "She's no East Point girl, she's just out of college and getting a year's experience or something," soliloquized Hemmingwood. "Must be some little schoolhouse up at that settlement I saw from the air. Cute kid, and she knows what it's all about too." He resumed his pilgrimage to East Point, musing contentedly on the prospect before him. He had not proceeded 500 yards, however, before loud clanking and rattling announced the fact that there was a vehicle approaching. A battered Ford truck bounced into sight and clattered up to him, slowing gradually. Loose tools in the rear were responsible for the weird combination of noises given forth by the flivver. 2 men were in the seat. The truck stopped alongside the flyer, and the fat man at the wheel hailed him. "Morning. Git down all right?" "Yes, thanks. Nothing the matter. Landed on purpose." "I see. Looking for anything special around here?" The driver's round, red face was the setting for a pair of small, green eyes encased in rolls of fat. He was dressed in greasy mechanic clothing and a battered felt hat. His companion was a gaunt man of middle age, boasting a drooping mustache and a melancholy look. "I'm going to town to look for gas and oil and a place to sleep right now." "Climb in higher, and I'll take ya to town," offered the fat man, who seemed to be making a determined effort to be genial. Without a word his companion uncoiled his long length and languidly transferred himself into the rear of the truck. He was dressed in a black shirt and dirty khaki trousers, and his felt hat was in as decrepit a condition as the driver's. The Ford had barely turned around when the vanguard of the sightseers passed in 2 flivvers, both loaded to the guards with coatless men of all ages. They peered at Hemmingwood with concentrated attention as they dashed by. "I keep the garage hire and I can let ya have all the gas ya want," offered the driver. "Well, I've made arrangements in advance with Mr. Mumford," lied Hemmingwood. Just why he had said it he did not know. It was an impulse, but a sensible one. He intended to buy the gas of Mumford because of the girl, and he might as well avoid antagonizing anyone in East Point if he could. The driver grunted. He was plainly disappointed. "Get in right out?" he enquired. "No, I'll be here several days." The man glanced at him quickly, and the flyer felt instinctively that the man behind him was staring at him steadily and listening closely. "What for?" The forthright question was like a blow. "I was sent here to take a lot of pictures from the air," Hemmingwood explained. He felt the tenseness in the atmosphere, and was well aware of the attitude of mountaineers regarding any stranger, particularly a government man. Consequently he went to some pains to describe his mission exactly. Apparently he did not satisfy the fat garage man entirely, though. Hemmingwood was somewhat puzzled. It would have been more explainable if the man had been a mountaineer. Perhaps he was, and had graduated into a business in town. No reason why a man couldn't make moonshine just because he lived in town, either, he reflected. Several more cars passed them, all filled with passengers. 3 men on horseback and 2 buckboards were included in the procession. When they turned into the wide dirt street of East Point, there were knots of people, mostly women, talking on the sidewalks. They were plainly curious, and Hemmingwood was the target for severe inspection and several pointing fingers. Most of the houses were small frame buildings, neatly painted, and interspersed with several tumble-down shacks. The business section was halfway down the street, and consisted of a tottery wooden shed labeled garage, a small drug store with fly-specked windows, and a big, square building with a false front, modern show windows, and a big sign reading, Mumford's General Store Post Office, East Point, Kentucky. A bright red gasoline pump stood in front of it, and a rolling oil tank. 4 old men were in conversation in front of the store, and there was a group of younger men whose meeting place was evidently the garage. A few wagons were drawn up along the stone sidewalk, the horses tied to hitching posts. Evidently all the available cars had been driven out to the field. As they drew up in front of the store, the fat driver offered to wait and transport Hemmingwood back to the field, which offer the Bostonian accepted with thanks. He went into the crowded little store and looked around at the counters. "Mumford sells everything from pills to clothes," he soliloquized, and then spotted a short, broad, bald-headed man emerging from a cub aisle in the rear. It proved to be Mumford. Hemmingwood introduced himself, explained his need of 100 gallons of gas delivered at the field every flying day, and learned that Mumford owned a truck with which it could be delivered. The storekeeper also opined that he could undoubtedly find a place for the flyers to live if they would wait for definite information until the afternoon. The flyer studied his man a bit, and decided to take him into his confidence to a slight extent. He told him about the casual meeting with his niece that morning, and went on to say, "I came down here with Ballardson. He wanted this gas business, so to keep him from being sore I told him that I had made arrangements in advance with you. I don't know anything about East Point, but I figured it might save unpleasantness. Will you bear me out in my story, if necessary?" Roundfaced Mr. Mumford chuckled. "How come you figured Ballardson that way?" he enquired. "He didn't seem particularly friendly," Hemmingwood returned. "If there's any unpleasantness, probably he'll have something to do with it," stated Mumford. "These mountain people are funny, you know." On the way back to the field, Ballardson's questions and something in the attitude of both men showed plainly that they were not satisfied as to the precise purpose of the pictures Hemmingwood was to take. There were 50 or 60 people in plain sight near the ship, and as many more men, women, and children lurking half-screened in the surrounding forest. They watched the transfer of 30 gallons of gas with consuming interest. Knots of roughly dressed men conversed in low tones, while other more conventionally arrayed, made no mysterious motions. Hemmingwood caught a phrase, "The control wires go through the fuselage higher, and work these higher elevators." He looked around. He was up on a wing, holding the funnel over the main tank, to find out who knew so much about airplanes in that benighted town. It seemed to be a scrawny, red-headed chap wearing a nondescript felt hat, hickory shirt, and overalls. A moment later Hemmingwood noticed Ballardson in conversation with him. The slow job of straining the gas through the chamois was about over when the flyer heard voices raised in anger. He looked around and saw two men standing close to the tail surfaces of the plane, surrounded by a half-dozen others, including Ballardson and the airplane expert. "I say you're a liar," shouted a gaunt, raw-boned mountaineer who was one of the pair. The other, short and powerfully built, retaliated with a resounding slap. The next second they were locked in each other's arms. Hemmingwood leaped to the ground while the onlookers watched breathlessly. Those men were perilously close to the ship. If one of them put a foot through the frail linen of the elevators or rudder, as he ran toward them, followed by a person, he saw the taller man deliberately kick his foot toward the drooping elevators. In a flash Hemmingwood took in the details. Their faces were not those of two fighting men temporarily hating each other. And that kick had looked deliberated, even if it had missed. As he got within a foot of them they were poised directly over the tail assembly, straining mightily. Another second and they would have crashed together over the ship and would have put one de Havilland airplane totally out of flying condition for several days. It was a frame-up, Hemmingwood thought as he hurled himself at the contestants. He hit them like a human cannonball. And, for the moment, he was won. Characteristically, he was totally unimpressed by the odds against him. With fists and feet he drove the astounded battlers back. After they had recovered, they commenced to retaliate. No one else took a hand, for a moment, and Hemmingwood fought entirely alone. He seemed to be a dynamic ball, bristling with feet and fists from every angle. He was in a cold rage at the unwarranted interference of the mountaineers, and he gloried in the opportunity to vent some of it on them. He fought furiously, and for a few seconds actually had the best of it. A sweeping kick sent the stocky man to the ground, and George took a clumsy swing on the side of the head in order to sink his fist in the taller man's belly. That put that personage out for a second or two, so he was able to meet the rising gladiator with a wild flurry of fists that cracked home to the jaw and sent him down again. But he knew it could not last. He leaped back, and jerked out his Colt. "Stand still, you," he snapped, and his glinting eyes were hard and keen and his smile had more than a touch of grimness about it. Subconsciously he noticed Ballardson's amazed, slightly scared face, and the taut expectancy, half fear and half enjoyment, of the spectators. A person was at his elbow, his gun also out. "Listen, all of you," Hemmingwood shouted. There was utter silence. "There's at least one man here that knows airplanes. This framed-up fight was for the purpose of putting this ship out of commission. If another soul gets anywhere near it he's going to be filled so full of lead it'll take a block and tackle to lift him into the hearse. You're fooling with the United States Army if you knock me off." and you won't get away with it. I'm here to take pictures, and nothing else. I don't give a damn who or what you are, but by God, if you two birds or anyone else looks cross-eyed in my direction or starts anything else as funny as this, I'll commence to get damn interested. Now get the hell out of here, you two, and the rest of you get back and stay back." Which they did. They were thoroughly awed, and well satisfied to remain at a distance. It was significant that not a soul seemed to take Hemmingwood's part. Evidently the mountaineers had the village businessmen somewhat under their thumbs. "Nice start I've got," soliloquized the untroubled flyer. Chapter 3. He wasted no time in taking off, no telling when fleecy cumulus clouds would form in the sky and spoil the continuity of the strips. Upperson had everything in readiness. The camera was set in the floor of the rear cockpit, in which an opening was cut to fit it. The electric motor was connected, and spare batteries and plenty of film for the day's work were in a specially built recess behind the seat. After a few circles of the field, Hemmingwood set out for Herkimer, climbing steadily. In a half hour the altimeter was reading 11,000 feet, and the long grind began. He was flying his strips over the short 10-mile course, east and west. It was hard work to fly continuously with every faculty concentrated on keeping the ship absolutely level and flying a straight line, making sure that the strips had plenty of overlap and that the speed of the plane was kept constant. In the rear, Upperson was devoting all his attention to the huge camera and the motor. The camera was geared to shoot a picture automatically at intervals of a few seconds. When he wanted to reload, he signaled Hemmingwood, who thereupon flew around, killing time until the change had been made. 4 hours of it left even the nerveless pilot very tired. He was heartily glad when it was time to drop earthward again. They had covered the first 6 miles of the terrain they were to shoot. He hoped devoutly that there were no gaps to make retakes necessary. No way to tell that, though, until the thousands of pictures had been developed and laboriously put together in the completed mosaic. Mumford proved he was on the job by having the next day's supplies delivered at the field within a half hour after they had landed. By the time the big tanks of the DH were full, a few spectators had arrived and were looking in awed wonder at the gigantic bomber. Close on their heels came Miss Morgan. Mumford seemed distraught and ill at ease, referring to the fight only slightly. Hemmingwood decided that the merchant did not dare take sides openly against the mountaineers and that he was considerably worried because of his business connection with the hated government man. His niece, however, did not follow his lead. She beckoned Hemmingwood to one side, and her eyes were dark with worry. "Tell me about this morning," she commanded, and Hemmingwood obliged, giving a more or less ludicrous account thereof. "Upperson and I are going to stay out here and guard the crate," he concluded. "I guess they won't monkey with us anymore. I notice that the wild-eyed mob here are keeping their distance pretty well." "I wish you wouldn't take it so lightly," she protested. "You have no idea how they are when they're aroused or frightened. With your ship flying around over them all day they'll feel hunted, and, I tried to explain this morning that I'm not interested in their private crimes, Hemmingwood told her with a grin. I know, but the poor dears have been hunted so much for things like moonshining, which they consider perfectly all right. You know, they can't see for the life of them why they should be taxed, or be breaking the law, because they make some corn mash out of their own corn and distill it. I know. But the poor dears give me a pain in the neck when they try to bust up my ship. But let's not worry about it, eh? Whereupon, in a very presentable baritone, he burst forth into a song, Snap your fingers at care. Don't cross the bridge till you're there. The girl hesitated, smiled, and finally laughed. She became serious again very soon, however. That's fine, but please be careful and try not to alienate them any more, won't you? She begged him. Hemmingwood assented, and he was aware of a curious feeling of warm satisfaction that she took so much interest in the situation. He himself simply couldn't be worried about it. He was an unusual type. He could not be said to be brave, because he was really unacquainted with fear. It was a strange paradox, that a man who loved living so much should hold life itself so cheaply as did George Arlington Hemmingwood, of the Hemmingwoods of Boston. I'll bring you your supper, she offered. I've got to go to town and see if I can rustle some blankets and perhaps a tent from your uncle. He just told me he had some. The noise of a motor became clear, and George looked up to see the Mumford truck on its way homeward. I intended to get a ride back to town, but I see I missed out, Hemmingwood observed. Mumford apparently wanted to spend no more time than he needed to in the vicinity of the flyers. Don't blame him, please, Lieutenant Hemmingwood, the girl said in a low voice. You have no idea what a difficult position he is in because of the trouble this morning. The mountain people, I understand. There's no reason why he should risk being mixed up in it, nodded Hemmingwood. I'll give you a lift home on Pegasus, she offered, and so it came about that Hemmingwood had a hilarious ride back to East Point on the rear deck of the venerable Pegasus. He got off a little way out of town, although the girl did not suggest it. I can't call on you tonight, which I intended to ask permission to do, he told her, smiling up into her own mirthful eyes. You have no idea what an angel from heaven you'd seem if you passed our palatial pasture home this evening, though. She hesitated a moment, and then laughed. I am invited out so little here that I miss no opportunities to take part in the social whirl, she smiled. Auntie and I will accept with pleasure, and supply a better picnic supper than you can get out of cans, too. He got his supplies from Mumford, including the tent, and likewise a letter, addressed in pencil to Lieutenant Hemmingwood in care of Mumford's store. The script was all but illegible. He opened it in Mumford's presence, and read, Take my advice and get out of town quick or you'll be sorry. I know what I'm talking about. A friend. Hemmingwood's mouth stretched in a wide grin. He thrust it into his pocket and said nothing about it to the patiently curious Mumford. He showed it to Epperson, back at the field, and that wily Scot shook his head. "'Tis no such a bonny country," he remarked, sucking at his pipe. "Funny people, wild as March hares," assented Hemmingwood. "They'll think several times before they really try to harm us, though. The most we've got to look forward to is another attempt to harm the ship, I imagine. Our hides will stay intact except under unusual circumstances. Let's pitch the bungalow so I can catch a nap before dinner arrives." Which they did. And Hemmingwood, entirely unaffected by the note in his pocket, fell asleep immediately. He had much more interesting things to think about than crazy mountaineers. Miss Morgan, for instance. His awakening was very pleasant, being brought about through the medium of Gail Morgan's far from unmusical voice. He thrust his tousled head through the flaps of the tent and smiled through the fog of heavy slumber. "I hope I'm awake and that this isn't a dream," he greeted her. "I brought you large sections of food which may be a little more appetizing than you could have found," she told him, smiling down from her throne on Pegasus. "If urged, I might even toy delicately with some of it myself. My aunt couldn't come. She wore no hat, and her piquant face was framed in flying brown hair." Hemmingwood smiled appreciatively at the picture she presented. "Where's a person?" he inquired. "Asleep in the ship." That worthy was awakened for the meal, which did not conclude until after twilight. Gale leaned back against one wheel of the ship in comfort. Hemmingwood lay lazily at full length. A person went for a walk. He was a tactful man, was the sergeant. "Your uncle was a bit mysterious about this Ballardson bozo," Hemmingwood remarked. "There's no love lost between them, is there?" "Oh, they get along all right," Gale responded carelessly. "Uncle Ed doesn't exactly approve of Ballardson, though." "Why not, if I'm not too curious?" "He's from the mountains, you know, and everybody knows that his garage business doesn't amount to anything. His real occupation is transferring moonshine by truck into various towns, Covington and Cincinnati, principally." "I see." It was probably Ballardson who had sent that note, Hemmingwood reflected. The garage man did not cotton to the idea of a ship flying above the mountains several hours a day, taking pictures which he would figure might be for the purpose of locating stills. He had taken a chance that the letter would scare the interlopers away. Hemmingwood did not anticipate any more extreme measures, when the note failed to work. It had been his experience that the uniform of the United States Army aroused respect enough to make any wearer thereof immune from actual personal violence, under ordinary conditions. He had seen the effect of it on the border and likewise in these same Kentucky mountains. Except under unusual provocation, an army man was much safer than any other stranger could possibly be. "Has East Point got any minion of the law?" he asked. "Just Ballardson," returned Gale, with that little chuckle that Hemmingwood so enjoyed hearing. The pilot laughed aloud, and Gale joined him. "So the prominent bootlegger is peace officer, eh?" chortled Hemmingwood. "That's what I call a real tight corporation. "He's pretty good at the job, aside from the moonshine, too," the girl told him. The stars winked into being, and before long a thin moon rose above the mountains. They talked casually of many things, with an undercurrent of friendly understanding that seemed like the result of long acquaintance. Hemmingwood learned that his estimate of her was correct. She had finished college the year before and was spending a year in East Point because of the ill health of her aunt, and likewise because her own rather drawn condition as a result of hectic college years. "I tried to study all day and dance all night and it didn't work," she admitted. "But I had a good time. I haven't minded it so much up here, but I'll be glad to get back. Weekends in Louisville once or twice a month have been about all that kept me from dying of dry rot this winter. Flyers don't drop in every day." "They don't know you're here," he told her. "After I spread the news they'll be flying in here in coveys." A person came back and disappeared into the tent. Hemmingwood was to take the first watch. At 9 o'clock Gail got to her feet and announced that she must be going. Hemmingwood walked over to the fence with her. Pegasus was tethered there. As their hands clasped in parting and he looked down into her upturned face, he obeyed an irresistible impulse and leaned over to kiss her. She slipped away, laughing. "We're getting along wonderfully, but not that well," she chuckled, and swung aboard Pegasus. "Good night. And if you have any more fights I hope you win them." He stood and watched her as Pegasus ambled along the moonlit road. Just before they entered the deep shadow of the trees she turned in the saddle and threw him a parting smile and waved. She seemed, at that moment, like some little goddess disappearing from mortal eyes into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. He walked back to the ship slowly and sat in the cockpit. His Colt was ready to his hand, and the shadowed mountains clustering around him seemed doubly mysterious, even menacing, under the blanket of the night. They seemed to be whispering with all the bloody legends of the mountain country and to be vibrant with some of the passion and untamable wildness of the people whom they sheltered. And yet George Arlington Hemmingwood, a lonely watchman in the midst of all-pervading silence, was thinking, not of what might happen with his enemies, but rather of what the future might hold forth for himself and Gail Morgan. Chapter 4. According to instructions, a person awakened him at 8 o'clock. At 9 they had consumed coffee and bread, and were ready to take off. It was a delicate job on the rolling field, but again it was accomplished safely, and the ship cleared the surrounding trees by a good 50 feet. As it roared out over the forest, Hemmingwood held it low, pointing for the little schoolhouse where Gail presided. It was on the outskirts of the mountain settlement called the Hollows. As he passed over it he jazzed the throttle twice. He saw Gail thrust her head out of a window and wave her handkerchief. He returned the greeting with his free arm. There was a pleasant warmth in his heart as he circled back and left the schoolhouse behind. The ship was barely 300 feet high, so he nosed up in a steep climb. His right arm was draped carelessly over the side of the cockpit, and his eyes swept the ground idly. Suddenly he felt a jerk at his ankle. He dropped his eyes, and in utter surprise saw a clean gash on the inner side of his right boot sole. He moved his foot slightly and saw a hole in the wooden flooring of the cockpit. The next second he saw gas jetting forth from a jagged hole in the small copper tube which was the gasoline feed line between main tank and carburetor. The Liberty's roar died away into sputtering, and then silence. And down below there was nothing but impenetrable forest into which to crash. Hemmingwood reached automatically for the mainline petcock, and turned off the gas. Then he turned on the petcock which released the gas from the emergency tank, holding the ship in a dive to maintain flying speed. For agonizing seconds the motor did not catch and the ship was diving like a comet for the Earth. Hemmingwood cursed steadily, fluently. He had been shot at from the ground and, by dumb luck, they had hit the fast-moving target. There was nothing for it but to crash. What the hell was the matter with that gravity tank? If he could get his hands on the blankety-blank marksman. Then he saw them. There were 5 of them, partially hidden, and they were still shooting. He could see the smoke from their rifles. Unseen and unheard above the whining wires, there were bullets zipping through the air around him. There was 200 feet of altitude left. With his usually boyish face suddenly grim and hard, Hemmingwood swooped around and made the dive more steep. Might as well use that last little margin to teach those birds a lesson. His finger was on the machine gun control as he pointed the ship at them. And at that second the gravity tank got working and the motor cut in. There was 30 minutes gas in that tank, plenty to get back to the field with. Hemmingwood came to himself. Even his unemotional soul revolted at the thought of pouring a hail of death on the 5 would-be murderers below. But he did dive down at them, carefully aiming a bit beyond them, and his machine guns spouted fire and a hail of bullets which ripped up the trees a few dozen yards away from them. He barely brought the quivering, strained ship out of the dive in time to clear the treetops. He turned again, and for the next 5 minutes terrorized the hiding mountaineers with showers of lead all around them. Now let 'em see whether they've got any stomach to keep fiddling around, he grinned, as he swept back toward the field. His rancour was all gone, now that he was safe. It was something of a game to him. They fixed the main line by means of a spare rubber connection they had brought along, and got in a good 5 hours of work, landing shortly after 2 o'clock. A person, seemingly entirely unshaken by the events of the morning, had a suggestion to make. He led Hemmingwood to one side, so that Mumford, there with the gas, could not overhear anything, and said, "Let's dispense with lunch, sir. This is bonny weather. And it may be the morning's events'll scare 'em off, or maybe they'll try again. So the quicker we get through the better, to my mind." To which Hemmingwood assented. There were but a few onlookers this time, and seemingly the sound of the shooting had not been noticed. Mumford did not mention anything about the events of the morning, either, so Hemmingwood decided that it was a secret between himself and those 5 men on the ground. Which was just as well, he reflected. He did not particularly care for the news to spread that he had attempted to shoot up 5 mountaineers. They worked until after 4 o'clock, and once again Mumford was waiting with a new supply of gas. He seemed a bit more openly friendly now, and announced that Mrs. Mumford and Gale would again oblige with supper. They arrived in due time, along with Pegasus, the buckboard, and a big basket of provender, but left almost immediately after the meal was over. Mrs. Mumford, it appeared, was president of the Mental Improvement Society of East Point, which was to meet that evening to weigh the merits of English poetry from Chaucer to Masefield, and Gale was to sing. Hemmingwood did not mention the incident of the morning to Gale. There was nothing of the grandstander in him, and he did not want her to worry about it. After they had gone, he and Apperson smoked and talked and watched the moon come up. At 10 o'clock Apperson, who was to take the last watch again, was knocking out his pipe preparatory to retiring when Hemmingwood became aware of the fact that a horse was undoubtedly galloping toward them, and coming fast. They waited by the fence, hands on their guns. It was Gale Morgan, and Pegasus was a badly winded steed as she guided him up to the fence. "Did you shoot anybody this morning?" she asked breathlessly. Hemmingwood, a tingle of excitement running up and down his spine, told her briefly what had happened. "You hit Jim Corley," she told him. "He must have been one of those men, they're all Corleys over there. Jim must have been a little away from the others so that you got him. Anyway, they are coming over tonight to get you." "May I ask how you know?" Hemmingwood asked easily. Apperson was listening quietly, his empty pipe upside down in his mouth. "Mrs. Tootle, a woman I nursed when she was sick, sent her little boy to tell me. To these people, the fact that you and I have been friendly means that we must be sweethearts, so she wanted to warn me. She isn't a Corley herself, although she's kin to them." Gale was talking with breathless speed, as though laboring under almost unbearable tension. She went on, "I came right up, without telling a soul. You'd better start for East Point right off. No, I guess we'll have to guard the old ship, Gale. But you don't know these Corleys. They're bad. What chance will you have against 6 men?" I didn't know what to do. All the men in East Point are either with them or afraid of them. It would be suicide for anyone like my uncle to take a hand in it, Lieutenant Hemmingwood. But you could come down to East Point for the night, and, no. We'll stay. And there's nothing to worry about," declared Hemmingwood. "Gale, you're a brick. You're a whole mansion of bricks. Now you turn right around and gallop home before you get mixed in it yourself. I'll thank you later." "You can't stay," she said, the hint of a sob in her voice. "I tell you those Corleys, please run along, Gale. And I tell you we'll be all right. If I didn't think so, I'd light out. I'm not hankering to commit suicide." Finally, after Hemmingwood had outlined his plans, she did go, but not before she had exhausted every means of persuasion at her command. Hemmingwood had a hard time to keep her from staying nearby to see what happened, and then she announced that she'd tell her uncle and that they would both be back, which Hemmingwood likewise vetoed. "Please be careful," she whispered finally, leaning over a trifle. "And if there's any way you can, will you let me know that everything has come out all right? I couldn't close my eyes until I know, sure. Now for the love of Mike, pretty lady, beat it." She had not disappeared from sight before Hemmingwood and a person were busy. A big rock, protruding 2 feet above the ground, was the cornerstone of their defense. The ship was standing by the fence, the tent 30 feet away from it and 10 feet from the edge of the forest. The rock was in a corner of the field nearest the road, perhaps 40 feet from both tent and ship. They worked with breathless haste, carrying the fence rails over to the rock and constructing their barricade. In a half-hour they had a small, 3-sided fortification of which the rock formed the apex facing the tent, where Hemmingwood figured most of the action would take place, if any. The machine guns were useless, there was no time to dismount them. He was right about the scene of battle. Less than half an hour from the time they had ensconced themselves in their shelter, lying flat on the ground, they heard a rustling in the bushes behind the tent. Although the moonlight was flooding the world in silver radiance, they could see no signs of the men they knew were there. For taut minutes there was utter silence. Hemmingwood wondered whether the low structure of rails and rock behind which they were hidden would catch the marauders' eyes and scare them off. He hoped it would, but the chances were against it. It was fully 10 minutes before 6 ghostly figures, long rifles in hand, slipped out of the bushes and started to surround the tent. Hemmingwood acted before any of them went out of sight behind it. He shot his Colt in the air, and shouted, "Drop your guns! Hands up!" "Quick!" bellowed a person, to let them know there was more than one gun trained on them. For an instant 6 men, vague in the moonlight, stood like statues. Hemmingwood shot again, shouting at the same time, "Next shot I'll get someone. Drop those guns." The utter surprise of it and the terrifying effect of those 2 shots from unseen marksmen did the trick. The mountaineers were a bit too far from the shelter of the forest to risk a break for it against unknown odds. Their rifles dropped to the ground and 6 pairs of hands thrust slowly into the air. For a moment Hemmingwood was up against a problem. He knew in his heart that if those mountaineers had the nerve they could make their escape against 2 Colts. The darkness and the distance between the opposing factions made accurate shooting almost impossible. The most sensible procedure was for either him or a person to go out and make sure they were thoroughly disarmed, though the presence of one or the other in the vicinity of the 6 silent Kentuckians meant that the other man could not shoot without risking the wounding or killing of his ally. But it was the only possible chance. And which part should he take? Should he approach them and leave a person to cover him, or vice versa? He was a better shot than a person, and possibly the Scot might hesitate to shoot. He put the matter up to the sergeant bluntly. A person silently climbed out of the barricade and circled widely to approach the line of captives from the rear. If they were unarmed, except for their rifles on the ground, he and a person might get away with it, Hemmingwood reflected. Then a thought occurred to him, and he called a person back. He heard whispers pass between the mountaineers. "Keep quiet. No talking," he called sharply. "Then, if they make a move, drop to the ground so I can shoot," he told a person. "Wait a minute. Get in here. I'm going out there myself." Afterward Hemmingwood figured that the mountaineers, sure that they were opposed to only 2 men with revolvers, got the courage from the fact to make a break for liberty. As always among the mountain people, they were undoubtedly desperate at the thought of capture. For, just as Hemmingwood was climbing out of the barricade, the 6 men made a concerted leap for their rifles. Like a flash Hemmingwood dropped, and both Colts barked in a fusillade of shots. The flyer saw 1 man drop, and another screamed with pain. A hail of bullets poured from their rifles, and he heard a person groan. "They got me," he said weakly. Hemmingwood shoved another clip into his gun and emptied it into the woods wherein the Kentuckians had disappeared. He could hear them running through the undergrowth. When Hemmingwood was really mad, it was a sort of cold, calculating fury. That was his condition as he examined a person. It was a rather nasty-looking wound in the hip, but apparently it was only a deep flesh wound. As he bound it with handkerchief and belt, he said tersely, "Think you can move at all?" A person tried, winced, and said, "I could hobble in an emergency, sir." "What's in your mind, may I ask?" Hemmingwood explained quickly. If there was a way to get those men, he'd do it, and he did not figure the odds against him. The self-starter worked the second time he spun the booster magneto. The ship was already in position for the takeoff. With utter recklessness he shoved the throttle full on, and the ship hurled itself toward the dense blackness of the trees behind a cold motor. At the last second he zoomed the de Havilland across the menacing wall, and the matchless Liberty did its work. Half a minute later he had spotted the fugitives below, like ghosts slipping through the shadows. He gave them one chance. The first burst from his guns was close to them, but not aimed exactly at them. Then he swooped so low he was scraping the tops of the trees, and motioned them back toward the field with his arm. They must realize that he held their lives in the palm of his hand. They did. He saw them ostentatiously drop their guns and, with their hands in the air in token of surrender, start walking back toward the field. A person was waiting for them. Hemmingwood rode herd on them from the air while he watched the crippled Scotchman supervise while 1 man tied up his fellows with safety wire from the ship. They knew that the best they could do would be to kill a person, and then all succumb themselves to that withering blast of death from the air. For the next 30 seconds Hemmingwood flew as he never had before. It was a rare feat of airmanship to land his de Havilland in the darkness on that field, but he did it. He climbed out and looked their captives over. One of them was a gaunt old man, with a grey, tobacco-stained beard. 3 of them seemed to be middle-aged, and there were 2 young fellows. One who had fallen seemed little more than a boy. A person was binding his wound. The bullet had drilled through his thigh. Another man was wounded in the shoulder. Neither wound was mortal. Hemmingwood was thinking hard as to his next step. A person's wound was practically negligible, although he had to hobble on one foot and it drew a sigh from him every time his other foot touched the ground. Keeping those men prisoners meant a good deal of trouble and red tape. Probably the whole clan would descend on the flyers to revenge themselves if they stayed in the mountains, and very possibly there would be complications of considerable difficulty in even incarcerating them. Besides, his business was to get those pictures. A person was lying on the ground, to relieve his pain. Hemmingwood looked down at his captives for a moment in silent appraisal. They darted quick, fearful glances at him, like trapped animals. "Listen, you callies," he said conversationally. "You've tried to kill us twice. Once it was because you were afraid we were after you. That shows you're up to something. I could have killed you all then. I wounded one of you by accident, in trying to scare you. Then you pull this. I could have killed you all again. You know that. Now get this. I don't give a damn about you. I'm here to take pictures. I don't want trouble. I don't care whether you're making moonshine enough to float the British Navy. I've got you now. To show you that I don't want to bother with you, I'm going to let you take your wounded and vamoose out of here. Go home, lay off me, and behave yourselves. We've sniped 3 of you in exchange for 1 little wound, and by God, if you lift a finger at me again I'll mow you all down. Get anywhere near this field and those machine guns'll start working from the ground. They wouldn't know that the guns on the ship were useless on the ground unless dismounted. And get funny while I'm in the air and the same thing'll happen. And if you snipe me off some night while I'm here, you'll have enough of the United States Army combing these woods for you to run you down like rats. All the dope will be mailed in tomorrow, including who you are and what you've done. Now I'm going to spank you and send you home like the bad boys you are." A long sigh came from the astounded prisoners, followed by a deep chuckle from the old man. A person showed no surprise. Hemmingwood released them, and they got to their feet slowly. The old man smiled slowly, and it made a great change in his fierce, hawk-like face. "You can think o' the Corleys as your friends, stranger," he said slowly. "Come on higher, you." Carrying their wounded, they marched silently off into the forest. Chapter V. Less than 5 minutes after the Corleys had disappeared into the woods, the clatter of an approaching automobile interrupted the reminiscent conversation of the 2 airmen. It was the Mumford truck, and it carried Mumford, Gale Morgan, and 5 other men. One of them, he perceived, was Ballardson. Another was a doctor, who got to work on a person immediately. "Gale told me all about it," Lieutenant, said Mumford. Of course we couldn't let a thing like this go on. Of course not, interrupted Ballardson. The fat peace officer was ill at ease, and showed it. I'm glad there wasn't nothing to it. There was something to it, but it ended all right, Hemmingwood told him, and a perverse imp in his eyes was unseen in the darkness. He narrated the night's events briefly, and then added, I'm sure grateful to you for sending me that note of warning. He was watching closely, and knew he had scored. Ballardson's mouth opened and closed in fish-like gasps. Hemmingwood turned to the other men, who were suddenly interested. Got an anonymous note, warning me to get out of town for safety's sake. Just found out it was from Ballardson here. Thanks again, officer. The men were silent, as though at a complete loss for words. Hemmingwood knew, however, that he had put a weapon in their hands which would save both them and him any reprisal from the crooked official for the night's work. He was aware of how slight an excuse was needed for a mountain feud, and surmised that Mumford and the other East Point men had made a real sacrifice in coming to his assistance. The men drifted over to the ship to examine it at close range. Hemmingwood gave Mumford succinct details about the note and the successful shot he had fired at Ballardson a moment before, and then joined Gale, who had been standing quietly in the background. Gale, we never can thank you enough, of course, he said. Don't try, then. I'll take it for granted, she laughed back. She was elusively lovely in the moonlight, and Hemmingwood found himself in the grip of profoundly disturbing emotions. Ever since I arrived you've been doing favors for me, he found himself saying. And then to his own surprise, he added, I wish you'd do me one more favor, and marry me. For a second her glorious eyes met his own squarely. Then she turned away quickly, and laughed. It might not be a favor, she said lightly, and slipped away toward her uncle. The truck carried a person back to town, but Hemmingwood stayed out at the field. He did not sleep well, either. Hour after hour he examined himself, mentally, and in the end he decided that he was afraid he was in love. The succeeding week only made him surer of it. While a person was convalescing he spent every possible hour with Gale, but never was the subject closest to his heart mentioned. George Arlington Hemmingwood, who had never known what it was to be shy or at a loss, was totally unable to nerve himself for the ordeal of a serious proposal. Night after night he tried, only to stutter off into banal nothings. That is, until the morning when, a person being recovered and the pictures all taken, they were about to take off for home. With a crowd around to watch the take-off, his helmet and goggles on his head and the motor idling along on the warm-up under a person's skillful hand, he impulsively bent over and whispered his plea into her ear. She listened quietly, her hand clasped in his. They were in back of the crowd and for the moment seemed to be inhabiting a little world all their own. Can't you possibly say yes? He asked her, his eyes holding hers steadily. I'm sorry, but I don't quite know yet, she whispered. I like you better than any man I've ever known." She hesitated, and then leaned close to him and said rapidly, "I think I want to say yes, but George, I'm not sure." "Perhaps this summer," he pressed her eagerly for a definite answer, but she shook her head. Even so, there was a song on his lips and such a leaping light in his eyes as he got in the ship that a person took one look at him, glanced at the flushed face of the girl, and smiled an enigmatic smile below his owl-like goggles. Hemmingwood took off, circled the field, and then obeyed an impulse to give the crowd a parting thrill. He swooped down low over the field and waved a farewell. In the forefront of the crowd he saw Gail, and she was beckoning wildly. For a moment he stared. She was signaling him down. He landed, taxied the ship to the edge of the field, and turned it around. She appeared alongside the plane, her hair whipping in the propeller blast and her eyes glowing warmly. The astonished crowd looked on, wondering, as she put her lips close to his ear and said quickly, "When I saw you leaving I found out that I was sure. Will you be back this weekend?" George Arlington Hemmingwood yelled like a Comanche Indian, and started to climb out. "Not now, no." "All right. Tell all the folks, and I'll be here Saturday if I have to build a ship." Thus wise she sent him away. Not until Goddard Field was in sight did George Arlington Hemmingwood, of the Hemmingwoods of Boston, come out of his rose-tinted trance. His face was one wide grin as he sent the ton-and-a-half bomber roaring downward in sweeping spirals and graceful wing turns. "Just before I left I seem to remember some remarks about love and matrimony," he reflected. "I'll have to tell these roughnecks sometime, I suppose. Won't that boy snap a rave? And won't I get the razz?" He did. It continued spasmodically long after the quarters of Mr. and Mrs. Hemmingwood became a popular gathering place, but Hemmingwood bore up under it wonderfully. The end transcriber's note: this story appeared in the 10th of July 1924 issue of Short Stories magazine. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook Moonlight and Moonshine Updated editions will replace the previous one, the old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start. Full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Symbol Electronic Works 1.0. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLAF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg. 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark symbol website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works provided that you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f1.f.1. Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2 Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph 1.f.3. You agree that the Foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.f.3 Limited right of replacement or refund. If you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1.f.4 Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.f.3, this work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.f.5 Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.f.6 Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the Foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the Foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion and distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur. A. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work. B. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work, and C. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol. Project Gutenberg trademark symbol is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers, including obsolete, old, middle-aged and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need are critical to reaching Project Gutenberg trademark symbol's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg trademark symbol and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a non-profit 501(c)(3) educational corporation organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's IN or Federal Tax Identification Number is 64-6221541. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, UT 84116. 801-596-1887. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg trademark symbol depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment, including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways, including checks, online payments and credit card donations. To donate, please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg trademark symbol Electronic Works. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg trademark symbol ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg trademark symbol ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the US unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg trademark symbol, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks.